Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is a little bit of a peculiar topic this time around. Um, I recently saw a documentary on Netflix called The Nightmare, which is about sleep paralysis. And in addition, there was a documentary, I can't remember if it was on Netflix or Hulu, but it had David Icke in it. And it's no longer there, but it was about alien abduction true stories. And what struck me as interesting about it was every single story was clearly a case of sleep paralysis. So, well, at the very least, 99% of them. There was a few that were a little off, but generally speaking, it was sleep paralysis. And as someone who's personally affected by sleep paralysis, I thought I'd sort of talk about that this time. For those of you who don't know, sleep paralysis is a phenomena in which a person wakes up, usually in the middle of the night, and finds that they can't move. And that alone is extremely distressing, to wake up and be unable to move at all. But then, bear in mind the person is awake as far as that goes, or at least they think they're awake. They're perceiving things in a wakeful, lucid kind of state. So everything feels very real. Then things that would normally happen in a nightmare start happening. And it's astonishing how in every culture these tend to be relatively universal. Usually some kind of hideous creature crawls on top of the person and puts their weight on that individual's solar plexus, making breathing difficult and staring them down. And it's very frightening. It's hags in some cultures, and incubi and succubi in other cultures, which I think is where actually the incubus-succubus stories actually come from, in addition to wet dreams, which I'm not going to get into that because it's really unrelated. It's just, I think that also plays a role in the succubus myth. But anyway, more importantly, the individual is awake, unable to move, and is hallucinating something very frightening that is putting a lot of weight, usually on their chest. Not always. For me, it's actually very rare, and I'll get into that later. But it feels real, completely real. And I've had these experiences since I was a child, and it's always surprising to me when I meet people who've also experienced it who think it's real. The modern day equivalent of the incubus and succubus is the UFO abduction story. I was asleep and I woke up. I don't know what time it was. I want to say 3 a.m. and I couldn't move. A strange light filled the room, and the next thing I knew, I was lying on a medical table with all these strange creatures, and they were staring at me. It was clear they were from another world. They began to operate on me. I could feel the whole thing. It was like they were speaking into my mind. That's how all those stories tend to go. Well, yeah, that's what sleep paralysis does to people. You hallucinate things that would normally make you very uncomfortable, and usually in really terrifying, helpless sort of settings, and you feel like you're awake the whole time. For me, for example, it's funny how archetypes play a role in that. You know, there's the aliens now. There were demons, incubi and succubi, and hags and hobgoblins in the past. In previous pagan cultures, it was more like trolls and goblins and fairies, things of that sort. Well, for me, for example, there's a strange archetype for me. Usually, when I experience sleep paralysis, they're not putting weight on my chest at all, but standing over me is often a executioner type figure, someone with an occluded face with either a mask or a hood or something like that, and they're standing over me, and they usually have some kind of sharp object like an axe or a really big sword, and they're just standing over me. And I know that any minute, the moment I am able to move again, they'll bring it down and kill me. It's an unpleasant thing, but I always acknowledged it as not real. You go back to sleep, and then you wake up and you can move again, and it's daytime and it's time to get up. That's normally what happens with me. But I'm rather shocked how many people I've seen both in interviews on television as well as in real life who genuinely believe that it was a real experience. I know people who've claimed that they've been burglared Nothing was missing, but someone stood over them when they woke up. Things like that. It's not real. It's what really is happening is part of the brain is waking up and part of the brain is still asleep. And so you're in this bizarre half state where you're simultaneously capable of dreaming, but you're also awake enough to acknowledge your surroundings and your world. So what you're kind of doing is you're broadcasting dreams onto the real world. It kind of reminds me of augmented reality, how with VR you can see things in the real world that aren't real. That's kind of what happens with sleep paralysis. It's a very strange thing, and it's never good. I've never had a good experience. I don't think it's possible to have a good experience. I think that there's something inherently traumatic about waking up and not being able to move, that the amygdala, the primitive reptile fear center of the brain, is just like, time to think about bad stuff. We're in danger. You can't move. Therefore, there's a predator. I guess it's an executioner. Here we go. And that's what ends up happening. And more interesting is, anybody out there who experiences sleep paralysis, I highly encourage you to both meditate before going to sleep and to practice, and I'm not going to go into the details for it. You can look it up for yourself. It would take too long. Practice lucid dreaming, because like I said, I've been doing this over the course of my life, and so very early on I got into lucid dreaming as a means of overcoming this. And one unusual thing I will say is there definitely seems to be a correlation between sleep paralysis and out-of-body experiences, also known as astral projection, and lucid dreams. And I've experienced both. Quite often, with using mindfulness techniques, I've experienced sleep paralysis where it starts off negative. I can't move, executioner, the whole 9 yards. And then once I become aware that, this is sleep paralysis because I'm so used to it, then something interesting happens. Quite often I'll float out of my body, and it's trippy. I don't know whether it's, I'm not going to say whether what I actually think is happening, whether it's a genuine consciousness leaving the body or if it's just a really, really peculiar kind of dream. But it's pretty great. Like, it's so great that I'm no longer afraid of sleep paralysis, really, because 9 times out of 10 I can become aware of it through practice. That's something you have to work at it and turn it around, turn it into something else. Additionally, quite often after experiencing this out-of-body experience, and this goes across the board for lucid dreamers, usually lucid dreams are more successful if you wake up in the middle of the night and then go back to sleep rather than just going to sleep the first time. So sleep paralysis, if I wake up, can't move, have an out-of-body experience because I become aware that this is in fact not real, the subsequent time that I go to sleep after the paralysis is over, I will almost certainly have a lucid dream. And those are the best. Lucid dreams are amazing because really you can just invent your own reality. You know that you're dreaming. You know that this isn't the world that you were in when you were awake, and therefore you can sort of reinvent that world. You can do just about anything you want. There are exceptions to this. The dreams in and of themselves interest me. I highly recommend anybody who's really studied dreams and been interested in dreams to research Terence McKenna and all of his topics about how he thinks that thought he's no longer but he thought that dreams took place in an actual reality, and it was a similar reality to where people go when they have psychedelic experiences. I'm not sure if I actually believe that, but I do find it interesting that, and I know that the topic's changing a little bit, but when people dream, they have some universal experiences. For example, mirrors don't work in dreams. Light switches don't work in dreams. Architecture is always improper in dreams. That's very interesting that that's universal, whether it has to do with just the universal nature of the human mind or if maybe there's rules to dream worlds. I'll leave that for anyone watching to come to their own conclusions on that, but it is interesting. That's really all I'm going to talk about right now. There's not a whole lot more to flesh out. It's just be aware. Sleep paralysis is a genuine phenomena. It's not alien abduction. There aren't real demons harassing you, and you can absolutely change that experience through a lot of practice and work. Thanks. Subscribe, like video, comment, things like that. You get the idea. I need a script for like the very last part, because yeah. Bye.